Anataly Mosvven was known, on paper, as the kind of person you'd expect to spend their life buried in libraries, not buried in nightmares. He was a Russian historian and linguist, described in reports as highly intelligent, with deep academic knowledge, and an obsession with cemeteries, burial traditions, and the way people memorialize the dead. To many acquaintances, he seemed quiet, harmless, even a little awkward, someone whose mind lived in books more than in the real world. But behind that calm, there was something rotting. Mosvven wrote about death like it wasn't an ending. He wrote about it like it was a doorway. Over time, his fascination wasn't just academic. It became personal, ritualistic, and eventually, criminal. Years before anyone knew what he was doing, people in his region had noticed graves being disturbed, headstones vandalized, plots tampered with. But cases like that can sit for years without answers. Too many cemeteries, too few witnesses, and often not enough evidence to point to one person. That changed in 2011 after he was detained for vandalism near grave sites. Police searched his apartment expecting to find political materials or extremist motives. What they found instead made the case infamous worldwide. Inside the apartment he shared with his parents were dozens of life-sized dolls, arranged like mannequins, dressed, styled, posed, and treated as if they were part of a collection. But these were not dolls. They were the preserved remains of children, girls ranging roughly from early childhood to preteen years old, exhumed from cemeteries and altered to look like lifelike figures.
Да, из трупов кукол. То есть глина там, да? Да. Там все девушки, да? Ну, как правило. Вечерние съемки. Ну, где ноги? Да.
Investigators later described details that sounded unreal even when written down. Internal stuffing, structural supports, makeup, clothing, and in some cases mechanisms added so that movement could trigger sound, turning these dolls into objects that didn't just look like they were present, but could also make noise. Police also found cemetery maps, grave markers, and items linked to the children. Reports described him keeping track of names and birthdays, and behaving as if these were not stolen remains, but companions. Mosvven claimed loneliness, obsession, and a distorted belief system that framed what he was doing as preservation, not desecration. His parents, living in the same apartment, claimed they believed the figures were handmade dolls, even though multiple reports described an odor in the home. Whether they truly didn't know, didn't want to know, or couldn't accept the truth is something the public still argues about. Mosvven ultimately admitted to grave desecration on a large scale. He was declared unfit to stand trial and diagnosed with severe mental illness, and he was committed to psychiatric treatment rather than serving a traditional prison sentence. Over the years, there have been repeated reports and court discussions about whether he should remain confined or be moved to outpatient treatment, and victims' families have consistently fought against any possibility of him returning to society. And that's what makes the Mosvven case feel so uniquely disturbing. It isn't just violence. It's the way the crime rewrites what home means. Because for years, while families visited graves believing their children were at rest, some of those coffins were empty. And the person responsible wasn't hiding in a distant forest or vanishing into a crowd. He was sitting in an apartment, living with what he stole, and pretending it was normal. But if you think that case felt unreal, wait until you see what happened in this next one, when a person vanished in front of an airport security camera. On July 8, 2014, at Varna Airport in Bulgaria, a 28-year-old German tourist named Lars Mittank was supposed to board a flight home. He had his luggage, he had his passport, he was in the airport, at the finish line of the entire ordeal. But he never got on the plane. Instead, security cameras captured Lars suddenly sprinting out of the terminal like he'd seen something that convinced him he had seconds left to live. He abandoned everything: his bags, his phone, his wallet, and his passport. He ran across the parking area at full speed, climbed a tall barbed wire fence, and vanished into a field, sunflowers stretching toward a forest beyond. That grainy footage is the last confirmed sighting of Lars Mittank. And what makes it so disturbing is that it doesn't look like someone late for a flight. It looks like pure panic. A week earlier, Lars had been on a normal vacation with friends at Golden Sands, a resort on the Black Sea. According to his friends, everything was fine. Beach days, nights out, casual tourist stuff. But the day before they were meant to fly home, Lars got into an argument with a group of men, reportedly other German tourists, over something stupid, like football. The argument ended with Lars being hit hard enough to rupture his eardrum. A doctor warned him that flying with a damaged ear could be dangerous because of cabin pressure, and he was advised not to fly. His friends wanted to stay, but Lars insisted he was okay and told them to go home. He'd stay behind, rest, and catch the next flight. That decision mattered, because from that moment on, Lars was alone in a foreign country with an injury, rising anxiety, and no familiar support system. He checked into a cheap hotel near the airport, and that's where his behavior reportedly began to change fast. He called his mother, Sandra, whispering that men were after him, trying to rob him or kill him, and begged her to cancel his credit cards. Hotel staff later described him as paranoid and unsettled. Security footage reportedly showed him pacing, peering out windows, and acting like he was hiding from someone who wasn't there. The next morning, he went to Varna Airport, hoping the flight would end the nightmare. He texted his mother that he was at the terminal and went to see the airport doctor to be cleared. According to accounts, the doctor said Lars seemed extremely anxious, like he couldn't relax for even a second. And then, during the consultation, a construction worker entered the room. Something about the sight of that man, whether it was his appearance, his uniform, his movement, or simply the timing, seemed to flip a switch in Lars. He reportedly panicked, shouting that he didn't want to die there. Then he ran. The most common explanation people return to is a mental health crisis, possibly triggered by the head injury, stress, sleep deprivation, and medication. Lars had been prescribed an antibiotic, and antibiotics can very rarely cause side effects like confusion or paranoia in some people. But other details complicate that theory. Reports say the medication was later found in his abandoned bag, unused. So the question remains suspended in midair, just like that footage. Was Lars running from a real threat, or from a terror his own mind created? Search teams combed the area. There were no confirmed traces. Over the years, there have been countless alleged sightings, different countries, different continents, but nothing that held up. All that remains is the clip. A man sprinting out of an airport and disappearing into a field, leaving the world behind in a matter of seconds. Sadly, it seems it's the kind of mystery that never closes. But in the next case, help arrived just in time. In late September 2021, 3 young children, ages 2, 6, and 7, went missing in the Sam Houston National Forest near Montgomery County, Texas. The children had been walking along a commonly used trail connecting their homes, but wandered off the path to play in a dry creek bed. When they tried to return, they realized they were lost. The Montgomery County Sheriff's Office received the initial report around 7:55 p.m. on Thursday. As night fell and rain began moving into the area, concern intensified. Dense forest, dropping temperatures, limited visibility. Time was critical. A large-scale search operation was launched involving multiple law enforcement agencies, fire departments, Montgomery County Search and Rescue, helicopters, drones, and K-9 tracking teams. Throughout the night, responders combed the forest. The children, remembering advice from their parents, stayed in one place and took shelter under a fallen tree, waiting for help. On Friday morning around 9:30 a.m., a local volunteer familiar with the terrain began searching independently. He located the children more than a mile from where they were initially believed to have entered the forest. Struggling with weak cell service, he eventually managed to contact 911. Dispatchers triangulated his position and directed Sergeant Jason Smith from the Montgomery County Precinct Constable's office toward them. Body camera footage captured the moment Sergeant Smith found the volunteer and the children in the dense woods.
Ain't Jesus good?
He's good. Kids, I'm the police. Are y'all ready to get out of the woods? Come on, buddy.
Let's get out of here. You got cheeseburgers in your car?
We're going to get something to eat. Okay? You want to hold my hand? We'll get out of here?
Cold.
Come on.
Cold.
Smith led them out, using his phone's compass for navigation. When his phone battery began failing, other responders activated their sirens to help guide him toward safety. After a 20-minute hike, they emerged from the forest and were reunited with first responders. EMS evaluated the children and confirmed they were uninjured. What could have ended in tragedy became a massive victory, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest decisions, like staying in one place, can save lives. Other times, however, survival is actually standing up because someone is already in your home. It's around 4 o'clock in the morning in Omaha, Nebraska. Your house is quiet. Your family is asleep. And then you hear it. Someone outside screaming at your front door. Not yelling like they need help. Screaming in a way that makes your stomach drop because it doesn't sound normal. It sounds uncontrolled, almost animal-like. You don't know who it is. You don't know what they want. And the worst part is the certainty in your chest that they're not leaving. That's exactly what happened to UFC light heavyweight Anthony Lionheart Smith and his wife one night in their home, while their children and family were asleep just down the hall. At first, Smith didn't even understand what he was hearing. In your own house, half awake, your brain tries to explain things away. Maybe it's someone outside. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's nothing. But then the screaming didn't stop, and it got closer. The footage captures the moment the man lingers near the door, stepping back, squaring up to it again, and letting out another scream that doesn't sound like a person trying to get in. It sounds like a person who already decided they're going to.
Get out! Get out now! Get out now!
What happened next didn't just scare Anthony Smith. It changed him. Smith is the kind of person you'd assume would be the last homeowner an intruder would want to run into. He's fought some of the toughest men on earth. He's trained for years. He knows exactly what violence looks like when it's controlled, when it's measured, when it's inside a cage with rules. But this wasn't the UFC. This wasn't a fight with rounds, a referee, or a way out. This was his home, his wife, his mother-in-law, and his children asleep nearby, and a man inside the house who was screaming like he didn't recognize fear. Smith later said that the moment his wife told him someone was in the house, his thoughts instantly went to the worst-case scenario. Does he have a weapon? Is he here to hurt my family? Is he here to kill someone? Because people don't break into homes at 4 a.m. for good reasons. Smith quietly moved through the house and found the intruder, later identified as Luke Haberman, inside the computer room. And when Haberman turned and started advancing toward him, it didn't feel like someone trying to escape. It felt like someone was trying to intimidate him, almost daring him. Smith described what was going through his mind in that moment, how quickly it went from confusion to survival mode.
So I'm expecting he has something, and I don't. So I just needed to get to him and honestly do as much damage as I could before I was going to succumb to whatever he had. And that was my plan. I was just going to do as much as I could, and hopefully my family could get out, or you know, if I ended up dying or from a gunshot wound or whatever, that at least he'd be hurt enough that they could deal with it. So that was my mindset going into that situation, and unfortunately he wasn't armed.
While Smith focused on keeping the intruder away from the rest of the house, his wife moved fast, waking the kids, gathering them into a room, locking the door, and calling police. And then the fight started. Smith expected it to be quick. Haberman was smaller than him, around 170 pounds, while Smith fights at 205. But the second they made contact, Smith realized something was off. The man didn't react the way people normally do. He didn't break. He didn't hesitate. He didn't go down the way an untrained person goes down. Smith later said it was one of the hardest fights he's ever been in. Not because Haberman was technically better than pro fighters, but because he felt like he couldn't stop him. Punches, knees, elbows, control attempts, nothing seemed to fully shut him down. At one point, Smith's mother-in-law brought him a kitchen knife. Smith said he didn't want to use it, but the fact that it even entered the situation tells you how desperate and chaotic it had become. Even then, Haberman kept fighting. After what Smith described as an eternity, several long minutes of exhaustion, adrenaline, and panic, police finally arrived and were able to restrain Haberman. The room was covered in blood. Haberman's face was swollen and cut up, and as he was being led away, Haberman looked at Smith and said something that didn't match the madness of what just happened. "Hey man, I'm sorry." Haberman was charged with first-degree criminal trespass. Reports at the time noted he was taken for medical treatment rather than being immediately booked like a typical violent suspect, adding even more confusion to a night that already made no sense. And the questions didn't end there. Why Smith's house? Why that night? Why the screaming? Why the relentless aggression? He reportedly hadn't stolen anything. And it turned out he had also tried getting into other homes in the neighborhood. He even made it into another house earlier before being chased off. He reportedly entered Smith's home through an open garage. Later, people discovered Haberman had a wrestling background. He wrestled in high school, and that may help explain why he was so physically difficult to control even for a trained fighter. But for Smith, the explanation didn't erase the trauma. Because it's one thing to lose in a cage. It's another thing to fight for your family in your own home and realize you can't predict what the person in front of you is capable of. Smith later admitted the experience haunted him in a way MMA never did. It didn't just scare him. It made him question the sense of control he'd built his entire identity around. And the scariest part is still the simplest. We still don't truly know what Luke Haberman believed was happening in that house, or why he chose it. One thing is for sure though, Smith survived his nightmare face to face. But the next story, however, is about a moment frozen on an SD card, waiting years to be found. In July 2019, YouTuber Rich Aloha was scuba diving at Foster Falls State Park in Tennessee when he made a discovery that would stay with him forever. He had been searching for lost valuables, jewelry, phones, anything of worth, in the murky water near the base of the waterfall. Instead, buried in the mud at the bottom of the lake, he found a GoPro camera. At first, it seemed like just another lost item, but it wasn't. The camera belonged to Richard Ragland, a 22-year-old man who had tragically drowned at that very location 2 years earlier, in 2017. Ragland had been swimming with friends near the waterfall when he went underwater and never resurfaced, just days before his 23rd birthday. What made the discovery even more astonishing was this: the GoPro's SD card was still intact and functional after being submerged for 2 full years. When Rich checked the footage, he found video of Ragland's final moments, smiling, laughing, swimming, enjoying the day with friends. There was no sign of distress in the clips, just a young man living fully in what would unknowingly be his final hours. At the time, Rich didn't immediately recognize who he was watching. But he remembered that park rangers had once told him about a young man who drowned there years earlier. The pieces began to fall into place. This was likely the missing camera. Determined to return it to the right people, Rich began researching online, trying to locate Raglan's family. After hours of searching, he was finally able to reach his parents, Robin and Gary McCree. The call was emotional. Years earlier, park rangers had attempted to send the family a thumb drive containing some of Richard's final footage, but it had reportedly been stolen in transit. They never received it. They never got that piece of closure. Rich eventually met with the McCree family in person to return the GoPro and its contents. It was a deeply emotional moment. For the first time, they were able to see their son alive and happy during his final hours. Robin McCree later said that Rich's persistence in tracking them down meant the world to their family. Rich, who considers his diving adventures a form of ministry, described the discovery as indescribable. Of all the items he had ever recovered underwater, he said none had ever felt more meaningful than this one. But sometimes, video evidence apparently doesn't solve anything. It just makes the mystery sharper. On a stormy morning, April 18, 2016, fitness instructor Terry Leanne, Missy Bevers, was found murdered inside Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas. The case drew national attention almost immediately, but not just because of the murder. It was because of what police released afterward. Surveillance footage from inside the church showing a person wandering the halls before the killing, dressed head to toe like law enforcement in tactical gear, calmly opening doors, smashing glass, and moving like they had all the time in the world. Missy Bevers was born August 9, 1970, in Graham, Texas. She married Brandon Bevers in 1998, and they had 3 daughters. Missy was known for her energy and her positivity. She worked as a Camp Gladiator instructor, running early morning boot camps for a tight community of regulars. Her classes were often held outside in the church parking lot, but if the weather was bad, she'd move the workout inside the building. The night before she was killed, she told her group that the next morning's session would be indoors because storms were rolling through. Missy arrived at the church early, well before the 5 a.m. class, so she could set up equipment. Not long after 5 a.m., one of her students arrived and found her. Police were called. Missy was pronounced dead, and investigators began treating it as a homicide from the start. According to reports, Missy suffered multiple puncture wounds to her head and chest. Investigators also noted tools seen in the suspect's possession, and while authorities never officially confirmed the murder weapon publicly in a simple sentence, coverage and warrants suggested the injuries could match an instrument like the tools the person was carrying. The outdoor cameras at the church weren't working that morning, but the interior cameras were. They captured the suspect walking through the halls around 4 a.m., appearing oddly relaxed, even theatrical at times, as they tried doors and broke glass panels. The person was wearing what looked like a full tactical outfit: dark helmet, gloves, protective vest, and heavy gear that made them appear bulkier than they likely were. Investigators believe Missy encountered this person somewhere inside the church while she was moving equipment in and preparing for class. Police have never released every angle of her movements that morning, and they have never publicly clarified exactly where the confrontation began, but they made it clear the interaction turned violent. Very early on, people argued over whether the suspect was male or female. The footage made it hard to tell, and investigators later said they could not confirm the suspect's gender. One detail that stood out to almost everyone was the way the suspect walked. In the footage, they appeared to move with an odd gait, slow, almost stiff in one leg, like something is either heavy, painful, or limiting their movement. Later, experts weighed in and suggested that heavy gear, boots, and equipment could distort someone's stride enough that you can't reliably identify gender from gait alone. Investigators initially explored the possibility that the suspect was staging a burglary because the person appears to be breaking glass and opening doors as if searching for valuables. But as the case developed, it became harder to believe this was random. Missy's purse and other valuables weren't taken. Nothing about the scene screamed robbery. Instead, it looked more like someone creating a story, a staged narrative. So the real reason for being there would be harder to see. Over the years, multiple warrants and reports referenced Missy receiving strange communications online, including messages connected to LinkedIn. Investigators looked into possible contacts and people who had interacted with her. Missy's husband, Brandon, and her father-in-law, Randy Bevers, were both scrutinized early, but their alibis were publicly reported as being checked. Brandon was out of state, and Randy was traveling. Randy also drew attention when it was reported he took a shirt with blood on it to a dry cleaner days after the murder, but later reporting stated testing showed it was dog blood, not human. One of the strangest side threads involves a car. In May 2016, Midlothian police released information about a vehicle they wanted help identifying, described as a 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima, seen driving near the area in the early morning hours. The car appeared on surveillance in the parking lot of a nearby sporting goods store, SWFA Outdoors. The driver's behavior looked unusual, circling, pausing, flashing lights, lingering, then leaving. Police said they wanted to speak with the driver, emphasizing the person wasn't automatically labeled a suspect, but they believed the vehicle could be important. And that's where the case still sits for many people. An unsettling video, a suspect dressed to disguise themselves completely, a murder with signs of staging, and years of tips with no public arrest. Rewards increased over time, and interest never truly died, because the footage makes the case feel like it's right on the edge of being solvable. But to this day, the most haunting part is still the same. Missy Bevers walked into that church before dawn to set up for a fitness class, and she never walked out again. Now, this next mystery isn't about who was inside a building. It's about what happened after they reached a lighthouse in the dark. In the early hours of May 27, 2018, Sophia McKenna and her friend Spencer Mugford set out on what they believed would be a spontaneous late-night adventure. Spencer was a student at the University of Connecticut's Avery Point campus in Groton, a school known for its marine and maritime programs. The two took a white and blue 14-foot sunfish sailboat, without a mast, from the school's marina and began paddling toward the New London Ledge Lighthouse, about a mile offshore. At around 2 a.m., Spencer posted a Snapchat photo of Sophia at the lighthouse. It would be the last known communication from either of them. Between 2:05 a.m. and 2:09 a.m., Sophia's mother, Michelle McKenna, received 7 missed calls from Spencer's phone. She was asleep and didn't see them until later. When neither Sophia nor Spencer returned the next day, their families filed missing persons reports. The Coast Guard, along with state and local agencies, launched a massive search operation covering approximately 225 square miles over the course of more than 70 hours. 2 days after they vanished, the hull of their boat washed up on a beach in New York. But there was no sign of them. On June 8, 2018, a boater made a grim discovery. Spencer's body was found floating roughly 2 miles south of Avery Point. The cause of death was ruled drowning. Sophia was never found. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighed around 130 pounds, and had brown hair and blue eyes. She had several distinctive tattoos, phrases on her foot and ankle, a crescent moon on her waist, and cherry blossoms with a butterfly on her shoulder. None of those identifiers have ever resurfaced. Investigators believe that after docking at the lighthouse, the boat may have drifted loose. Spencer, a strong swimmer, may have attempted to retrieve it, but struggled in the cold, dark water. Sophia, who was not considered a strong swimmer, may have tried to help him, leading both of them into distress. To this day, Sophia McKenna remains missing. Her family continues to hold on to hope, maintaining a Facebook group titled Finding Sophia McKenna to keep her story alive. But not every mystery is a person who vanishes. Sometimes the mystery is why the same accident keeps happening in the same location. In November 2019, a student pilot was flying solo in a single-engine Cessna 172, one of the most commonly used training aircraft in the world. The Cessna 172 has long been considered a forgiving, stable plane, the kind instructors trust with brand new pilots making their first independent flights. But on this approach, something didn't feel right. The student was preparing to land at North Perry Airport in Pembroke Pines, Florida, a busy general aviation airport frequently used for flight training. Conditions that day were reported to be clear. No severe weather, no obvious visibility issues. The kind of routine afternoon landing that happens dozens of times a day at training airports like this one. As the aircraft lined up with the runway, the approach appeared normal at first. But as the plane descended and the wheels touched the tarmac, the situation changed instantly. Instead of rolling straight ahead, the aircraft veered sharply to the right. The pilot attempted to correct, but the plane continued drifting off the runway, leaving the paved surface and sliding into the grassy area beside it. Momentum carried it forward as it struck and damaged 2 airport signs before finally jolting to a violent stop. Emergency services were alerted immediately. Police units and fire rescue crews rushed to the scene, expecting the worst. Miraculously, the student pilot survived. He was able to exit the aircraft without assistance. Though shaken and injured, his wounds were classified as minor. As a precaution, he was transported to a local hospital for evaluation. The aircraft itself, however, suffered significant damage. At the time, the crash was treated as an unfortunate but isolated training accident, something that, while rare, does happen in aviation. Investigations in these cases typically focus on mechanical factors, wind conditions, braking systems, or pilot input during touchdown. But then, over the next several years, something unsettling began to emerge. In 2022, tragedy struck the same airport. A flight instructor and student pilot were killed in a crash during landing. In 2023, yet another student pilot survived a serious accident on approach, escaping with spinal cord injuries after losing control of the aircraft. Then, in 2025, another plane crashed on landing, this time flipping and coming to rest upside down on the runway. Each of these incidents occurred on the same runway. Each happened in broad daylight. Each took place under what were described as normal flying conditions. To aviation professionals, the explanation lies in variables: pilot experience levels, wind gusts, crosswind technique, mechanical wear, human error. Training airports naturally see more incidents because they involve inexperienced pilots repeatedly practicing takeoffs and landings, the most critical and accident-prone phases of flight. But to some locals, the pattern feels eerie. The repetition, the same runway, the similar circumstances, the narrow margin between survival and fatality. Officially, there is no curse, no sinister force, just statistics, procedures, and investigations. Yet for those who have watched the headlines repeat themselves over the years, North Perry Airport has developed a reputation, not formally acknowledged, but quietly discussed. A runway where routine landings have, more than once, turned into something far more serious. And in aviation, where safety is built on predictability, even the appearance of a pattern can leave people uneasy. Now that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.